All right. Well, hey, we had, I think, eight new faces tonight. So I know some of you I've talked to about this. I'm just so grateful for just the growth of this group. I shared this week just in a quick video. You know, I think sometimes people can say, it's just numbers. It's not about numbers. It's not about growth. But remember, numbers represent people. And that's more people that are in seats, and that's more people that are part of this community, and that's more people. And so I believe that if these numbers are true, that's more people who are going to have stronger relationships with Christ, and from that they're going to have healthier decisions, and they're going to be part of healthier families, and that their families are going to be part of this trajectory. If the statistics are true that the most underrepresented group in church is from 18 to 28, it is scary to me that some of the most important decisions are being made during this time, and the church isn't a part of it. And so I'm so thankful you're here. I know some of you are probably like, there's other things I could do, but I'm here, and I appreciate that so much. Not because it does anything for us, but because hopefully it does something for you. And so I'm super excited about this message. So last week I talked to a couple people, and they were like, I did not like last week. Like, they were super freaked out by that and nervous about that. And there was kind of this idea of like, what do I do with all that information? And so this is a talk that took me about 10 years to put together. So I've done this at probably, 30 or 40 different churches. I taught for 4 years over this stuff, and I never quite knew what to do with this, because I do these talks and people would be like, okay, what's next? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to respond? And I always had answers, but I never thought they were really good answers until I kind of stumbled across this. And so let's just real quick go over the statistics we talked about. If you weren't here last week, this will kind of get you up to speed. So the research is telling us that about 70% of Christian kids leave the church when they turn age 18. And so there seems to be this mass exodus, this mass number of people who are leaving the church when they turn 18. Some people do it because they want to be their own God, and they're like, listen, I'm going to do what I want to do. Some people are leaving it because they're going, you know what, I've seen some really bad stuff in my life. If there was a good God, he wouldn't do this stuff, so I'm done with God. But what we have found is that 32% of those people who left the church, the reason they left the church is because they said, nobody answered my questions. And so this begs the question to say, if somebody would have answered their questions, if somebody would have taken them through a talk or a curriculum or a youth group, what would have happened to these 32% of these students? And I've always wondered to myself, I've always thought, you know, if somebody, in my story, an atheist who had 5 minutes and destroyed my faith, and the church had me for 18 years, how can the church have me for 18 years and the atheist have me for 5 minutes, and she can destroy what the church took 18 years to build? And I think the answer to that question is because we weren't preparing them for the questions. I told you last week about the story about Cora. Cora's sisters and brothers went off to the University of Texas, and they all three became atheists. None of them wanted to become atheists. They went there. They were inundated with the culture. They were inundated with the environment, and their faith was shattered. And Cora's sitting in my office, and she's crying. She's saying, Mr. Parris, it's only a matter of time. And as we talked through this and we kind of answered some of her questions, she asked me probably the hardest question I've ever asked. She said, what was the most damaging question that the atheist asked you? And as I thought about it, I was like, man, I don't even really specifically remember the questions. And then it was dawned on me, it was the fact that I didn't know there were questions. I wonder how many Christian young people just go through life assuming that Christianity is true, which is really great. You know, some people say like ignorance is bliss, but I always like to say ignorance is bliss until somebody points out you're ignorant, and then it's no longer blissful. And I think a lot of Christians are really ignorant. And I don't say that to be mean or judgmental, but to say they don't know what they believe or especially why they believe it. And so I want to give you some training tonight. We found out that the students who were informed, equipped, and made to think were the least likely to believe the lie. We told that study about William McGuire. William McGuire had somebody come in and he said, hey, it's wrong to brush your teeth. And they brought in 6 different groups, and ranging from the amount of information they had. The group that was just given information and reviewed what they knew, they were the most susceptible to believe the lie. And the group that was taught to train, to think, and to refute the arguments, they were the least likely to believe the lie. And I remember seeing this and thinking to myself, if this is true, if ideas are like viruses, and so in order to prevent somebody from getting sick, you put a virus in them, you build them up, they get stronger, and so when they get the flu, they're already ready for it. If this is true, and we took this information and we said, hey, 32% of Christian kids walk away because nobody gives them the virus. What if we started introducing the virus to our students? What if we started introducing the virus to a bunch of Christian kids? Now all of a sudden they go off into the college scene and somebody says, well, didn't you know? And they say, yeah, I've heard that before. Well, you've got to read The God Delusion. I actually read that. It was part of our Bible study. Well, you need to go listen to Christopher Hitchens. Yeah, I've listened to him before. He makes some good arguments, but there's also some holes in his arguments. What would happen to a group of young people if we prepared them for that? And I think the question that comes down, can you really prove Christianity, or is it just this subjective thing? I believe what I believe, and Muslims believe what they believe, and Mormons believe what they believe, and atheists believe what they believe, and we all kind of just do our own thing. Can you really prove Christianity? And the answer to that is, I think you can. I think if you were to set all the world religions down on a table and you looked at all the evidence, I would make the case that Christianity makes the strongest case. I was over at DBU on Wednesday morning. I was teaching a class on this stuff. I was teaching a group of students, and after class, I ran into one of the students. He was from Papua New Guinea. He was a missionary kid. And we were talking, and he was exploring all the faiths. And I remember as he said this, he probably was not expecting the answer that I told him. He goes, I'm exploring all the faiths. I said, that's awesome. You think at a school like DBU, people are like, no, you're not supposed to explore all the faiths. Here's what I'm thinking, explore all the faiths, because you know where I think it's going to lead you right back to? Christianity. I don't think Christianity has anything to hide. I think the most disarming thing you can do to a person is say, hey, check, here's my evidence. I told you guys the story. If my wife starts to question my morality or question my legitimacy, and she says, I just don't trust your phone, the most disarming thing I can do is give her my phone and say, you know my passcode, you know my email, you know all of my secrets, you know everything. Just go ahead and look. I think Christianity needs to do the same thing. I think we need to open it up and say, hey, listen, check. Ask us really tough questions. I'm not afraid. I'm afraid to bring the atheist in here in 3 weeks, but I'm not afraid for Christianity. I'm afraid for myself. I'm afraid that I'm not going to go to. Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. We've been asking questions of it for years, and guess what? It's still around. Christianity's still standing. There's not a question out there where it's going to destroy Christianity. And so I want to give you guys some training. Now, this is going to be like intense for like 2 minutes, and then I'm going to really break it down. So whenever somebody says to me, how do you show that Christianity is true? There's this argument that we have. It's called 12 points that will show Christianity is true. Now, this is a lot of information, and so I want to just reduce it down to something simple and then even simpler. So if you were to break it down to just 5 points, if you could show that truth exists, if you could show that God exists, that the New Testament is just a reliable book, that Jesus actually claimed to be God, and that the Bible is the Word of God, then Christianity has to be true. If you were to look at it in kind of a picture form, it looks like this. If you can show there's truth in God, in order for there to be the Word of God, there has to be God. In order for there to be the Son of God, there has to be God. If you can show this, somebody has to be a Christian. They can't say Christianity is false. Now, if they disagree with one of these points, at least it tells us where they are in confusion. So I would put it this way. If you can show that truth exists, that God is provable, the Bible is historically reliable, Jesus is shown to be the Son of God, and that there is an explanation for why evil exists, then Christianity has to be true. In order for somebody to deny Christianity, they have to prove one of these points false. Until they prove one of these points false, Christianity is true. A lot of times people say, well, no, the burden of proof is on you. No, the burden of proof is not on me. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim. So if somebody says to you, I don't believe Christianity is not true, prove your point. If you're going to make a claim that Christianity is not true, you have to show me which of these points is not true. Is it truth? Do you deny God? Do you deny the Bible? Do you deny Jesus? You have to prove that one of these is false, or my position stands, because you're the person who made the claim. And I think many times people get confused. Now you might be thinking, this is a lot of information. Where do I start? Well, just like any journey you take, where does it start? With a good roadmap. And so tonight I want to give you a roadmap to say the next time you meet somebody who is an atheist, a skeptic, a different religion, this is the roadmap you can use to help them understand and to help you defend the Christian position. Now, real quickly, just by a show of hands, how many of you would say that you have a conversation with somebody in the last 6 months who was not a believer in Christianity? How many would say? Wow. How many of you would say that you have more than three people in your life that don't believe that Christianity is true? Unbelievable. How many of you would say that you have more than 10 people in your life who don't believe that Christianity is true? How pertinent is this information? Rather than just saying, hey, here's my story, here's my church, what if we just sat down with somebody, not in an argumentative way, but we just sat down for coffee one day and we just said, hey, tell me what you believe and why you believe it. I'm not going to argue anything with you. I'm not going to try to prove my point. I just want to listen to you. I just want to see how you would do on this roadmap. So here's the story. I took a group of freshmen. I used to teach a class up in Illinois, and it was a bunch of freshmen. And I took them to a local university. It wasn't a Christian university. It was a public university, about 6,000 students. I would say that more than 50% of the students were not Christians at this university. So I took a group of students onto this campus, and I was like, hey, we've studied this stuff the entire year. Now you guys are going to go, and you're going to be on this campus, and you're going to find out what people believe and why they believe it. You're going to try to do the best to answer their questions. And it was awesome, and it was miserable. So this was the first story. This was the first kid that came up. I don't remember his name, but he was a student from California, and he believed that Judaism was the true religion. He believed the Old Testament, but he thought when it came to the person and the work of Jesus Christ that Christianity was not true. And I remember he was chomping at the bit to get to my students. And I really told the students, hey, let's try not to really engage too much. I just want you guys asking a lot of questions this week, taking a lot of notes. Try not to ask or answer any questions. But this guy was like just militant. Like he was like, what you guys got? What you got? And he was like egging my students on. Now, mind you, he's a college student. These are 4 freshmen. But these are 4 freshmen that have been trained. One of my students on the way over there, she was sitting in the back of the bus and she was like kind of like shelling up a little bit. And I was like, hey, what's going on? She's like, man, I'm freaking out. She's like, Mr. Paris, these are college students. They're going to know so much more than us. They're going to make us look stupid. And I said, you'll be surprised at how much more you know than them. And she's like, Mr. Paris, we're freshmen in high school. They're college students. I said, yeah, but they haven't been trained. All they've heard is things around them. You guys have been trained for this moment. And I'll just give you just kind of a flash forward. Our kids destroyed anybody that came on that campus. Not because we were trying to destroy people, but they just hadn't been trained. Our students were prepared. So this student just starts attacking my students. And I was trying to just stay back because I didn't want to interject anything. And I remember my students just kept responding to all of his objections, all of his questions. And eventually I kind of jumped in and I was like, hey, can we get you to, fill out a sheet of paper for our survey? And he's like, oh no, I got to go to class. He could not get out of there fast enough. My freshmen were able to engage him because they knew what they were supposed to do. But here's the thing that was most discouraging about this day. My students did a great job of answering questions and making cases, but they did a terrible job of navigating the conversation. And so I went home that night and I started to build this idea about how we can master the journey. My students had great knowledge, but they had no idea where they were going. They had no roadmap. How many of you guys have been to a doctor in the last 6 months? How many of you have ever been to a doctor in your lifetime? Okay, so if you've been to a doctor, they all do the same thing. You go to the doctor and you say, hey doctor, I'm not feeling well, and they start to ask you a ton of questions about what's going on. My shoulder's hurting. How long has it been hurting for? A couple weeks. Does it hurt here? No, not really here. It's more of like deep in the tissue. Is it a chronic pain? Is it an acute pain? Is it continual? Is it flex? They ask you all types of questions. Why? Because they're trying to figure out what's going on. A good doctor asks a lot of questions. And I would say the same thing about a good apologist, is they ask a lot of questions. But my experience has been is that when people meet somebody who's different, a different religion, a different faith, or an atheist, they never ask questions. They only make statements. They'll say stuff like, oh man, I just read this blog. Oh man, I just read this book. Oh man, I just read this article. And they think they're doing a really good job, but they have no idea who they're talking to. Now, let's flash back a little bit. What if you went to the doctor and you're like, hey doctor, I'm not feeling good. He's going, oh man, I just read this book. You're like, don't you want to ask some questions? That'd be kind of, I'm telling you, if your doctor doesn't ask you questions, you need to run. Because if a doctor's like, oh, I just read this article on the internet, you're like, do not experiment on me. Like, you're not trying medicine out on me. You're supposed to ask questions. And I think the same thing happens for us too, is to ask a lot of questions. And so for those of you that said, you know what, I got a friend, I got 10 friends that don't believe Christianity, don't bring them a bunch of information, ask them a bunch of questions. And I'm going to give you the 5 questions that you can ask to correctly identify their problem. So here's how the roadmap is going to work. If they say no to any of these questions, you stop, because that's where you know this person has a problem at. If they say yes, you get to move on to the next question. We're going to role play this out here in just a little bit, so let me give you the questions. Question number 1 is this: do you believe there are right answers and there are wrong answers? If they say no to this, if they say no, there's no such thing as right and wrong, you cannot move on to anything else. You can't move on to God, you can't move on to the Bible, you can't move on to Jesus, because they don't believe that there's such thing as right and wrong. So whenever you make your case and they disagree with you, they'll just say this: well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for who? Me. It's not true for me. You have to establish that there's right and wrong. In order to prove that somebody is wrong, you have to establish that there is a right. In order to say that Christianity is right is to say that all other religions are wrong. Sometimes that makes people mad, but it's just logical truth. Some people say to me, they say, well, can't Islam and Christianity be true? I say, it can't be true. Both can't be true. Now, Islam can be true and Christianity can be true, but they both can't be true at the same time in the same sense. Islam teaches that Jesus Christ never died. Christianity, the core tenet is that he did die and rise again. So can a person die and not die? No, that's not logically possible. It's either possible he did or he didn't, but it's not possible that he both died and didn't die. So let's assume for the sake of this presentation that we said they did say that there was such thing as right and wrong. They're like, yeah, that's obvious. There's right and there's wrong. The next question you need to ask him is this. Do you believe there is a supreme being greater than humanity? You don't have to actually be the God of the Bible, but just do you think there's something outside? Is there a giant computer? Is there Allah? Is there God? Is there something bigger than you and I? Now, if they say to you, if they say, no, I don't believe in God, pay attention to this. If they say, no, I don't believe in God, you cannot move on. Some people say, well, what about Jesus? Well, Jesus claimed to be what? The Son of God. Well, can there be a Son of God if there's no God? No, that just doesn't make any sense. Nor can you claim that the Bible is the Word of God unless there's God. And so right here, if the person says, I don't think there's a God out there, I think evolution has just proven everything, I don't think there's anything out there, you can't go to the Bible and you can't go to Jesus. You've got to stay here and say, well, we need to talk about God, because in order for you to believe in Jesus, the Son of God, or the Bible, the Word of God, we need to establish that there's God. Now, once again, let's assume for the sake of the argument, they say, yeah, I think there's something out there. I don't know who he is, but I think there is something bigger than you and me. You go on to question 3, do you believe the Bible is a historically reliable document? Now this, for a lot of people, is very confusing. Most of our debate in 3 weeks will be centered around this discussion. The reliability of the New Testament, is it a trustworthy document? Once again, if the person says to you, yes or no, I don't think the Bible is historically reliable, you have to go here. Because once again, where do we learn the most about who Jesus was and the claims that he made? Where do we learn it from? The New Testament specifically. If they don't think that the Bible is a historically reliable document, can we use the New Testament, Caleb? You can't. It's not a reliable source. So all the time we're going to be going back and saying, look at the book of Acts, and Caleb, what's he going to say to us? I don't care about the book of Acts. The book of Acts holds just as much weight as me writing on a piece of paper that the book of Acts is not reliable. And so in order for us to say the Messiah, the prophecies, the miracles, the claims that Jesus made, we have to show this to be a historically reliable book. If you skip this step, you're going to be wasting your time with that person. All you're going to be doing is circling all over the place. They're going to get confused. You're going to get confused. You're going to leave after 3 hours. You're not going to have an organized conversation. And they're going to go, I made a better argument. And you're going to go, I think I made a better argument. And you're not going to be able to establish who made a better argument because you didn't follow the map. Fourth question, if they've said yes to the first 3, the fourth question is this: do you believe that Jesus Christ is Lord? Once again, if they say to this, they say, no, I think he was a good guy, he was a smart man, but I don't think that he was the Lord. I don't think that he rose from the dead. I don't think that he performed miracles. Then you got to center down on this, because this is core to Christianity. It's in the middle of our name, Christianity, Christ followers. That's what the Bible talks about. And so we have to hunker down here. Now, for some, they may say, yeah, I actually do believe that Jesus Christ is Lord. And this was the last one I threw in, because I think what we're seeing more than anything is people are struggling with God and his goodness. People say, you know what, I believe in God, I believe in the Bible, I believe in Jesus, but you know what, if I'm honest with myself, I don't like him. I don't like the guy. I mean, there were so many things in my life where I got sick, or somebody got sick, or somebody died, or I just turned on the news one day and I watched it for a week straight and I said, there's no way that there's a God out there. And if there is a God out there, which I kind of believe there is, I don't like him. He's a jerk. He's megalomaniacal. He's just all about himself. He's narcissistic. I just don't even want to deal with him. And so I think it's important for us, especially in this generation, to talk about the sovereignty of God and the goodness of God and how God is working all things together. And I think really, honestly, most people walk away from the Christian faith not just because of unanswered questions, because nobody answers their questions to the problem of evil. And so I would say this: if we were to circle this up tonight and say, what is it that's going to help us to have an effective conversation with our friends? Every successful journey starts with a good roadmap. You got to know these 5 questions. Now, here's what's going to happen tomorrow. You're going to talk to somebody, or the next week, and you're going to go, no, Mr. Paris, I want to figure out what their questions are. I'm telling you, don't do it. You will be in a conversation for months, for years. You will get nowhere. Take them through the roadmap. No, I know this may seem really systematic, but this is going to help us. Do you think that there's right and wrong? Yeah, I do think there's right and wrong. Do you think that God exists? No, I don't think that God exists. Good, let's talk about this. Let's spend our time here. Well, I want to talk about Jesus. We can't get to Jesus yet. We got to talk about God, because in order for the Son of God to exist, you have to establish that God exists before we can establish the Word of God exists. After this, I'm going to email you guys a list of all the books that fall into these categories. And so when you meet that person, you can say, we're going to isolate right in. I don't want a doctor coming in and saying, well, your shoulder looks bad. Let's start operating on your knee. you go, dude, you're a terrible doctor. You're from like a third world country. Like, you need to operate where the place is. No offense to third world countries. But here's the thing. You isolate on the problem in the situation. If somebody is struggling with the belief in God, you spend all of your time talking about that. If somebody is struggling with the person of Jesus, you spend all of your time on that. And that's how you focus in. A good doctor asks questions and he identifies the problem. A good apologist does the same thing. In order to best help a person, you have to correctly identify the problem. Now, I want to do something real quick before we break into our groups. We're going to put some stuff up here. So these were students that were at the Bradley University, at the university my students went to, and they filled out surveys. And I'm going to put this up here, and I'm going to ask you which question that this person falls under. So, did they deny truth? Did they deny God, the Bible, Jesus, or did they have a problem with suffering and the problem of evil and things like that? So, this was Aaron. He filled it out, and he said, I think science can explain how life got started on earth. He was an evolutionist. So do you think his problem was with truth? Do you think his problem was with God? Do you think his problem was with the Bible or Jesus or the problem of evil? Trey, what do you think? Okay.
I think it's a mixture of God and the Bible.
God and the Bible? Okay. I think, now once again though, which one should we start with though, if it's God and the Bible? Which one comes first? God comes first, yeah. So we might be able to get to the Bible, but we first got to establish that God. Now, by the way, some of you say, well, how do we know that he didn't struggle with truth? Well, if you asked him more pointedly, what do you believe about creation? He would say that creation is what? It's right or wrong? Wrong. So he's affirmed that there's truth, that there's absolutes. Okay, this was Reese. Reese was one of the students we met earlier in the day. He said, I believe that God created life, but I think the Bible has been changed a lot over time. So he does believe in a being. So it wasn't his question, wasn't number one, it wasn't number two, it was number three. He thought that the Bible had been manipulated over time. Constantine, different things during the 4th century. So that was his issue. Gabriel said this, I think that all religions are equally true and no one can say that one religion is right or wrong. What do you think, Gabriel? Which question do you think he had a problem with? He had which one? Truth. Yeah, he had a problem with truth. And so you're going to waste all of your time talking with Gabriel if you go through the 300 plus messianic prophecies. If you go, man, you got to look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, he's going to go, man, that's true for you, but it's not true for what? It's not true for me. Man, you got to look at design and the elements of the universe, and you got to look at first causes. You're wasting your time because he doesn't even establish that truth exists. You're going to spend all of this time digesting all of this information on him, and he's going to go, that's true for you, but it's not true for me. You have to establish that's truth. In order for you to say that somebody is wrong, you have to establish that something is right. This was Eric. Eric said this, I think that God exists, but I don't think that Jesus was the Son of God. Did Eric have a problem with truth, God, the Bible, or Jesus? Jesus, yeah, he struggled with Jesus. So what am I going to do? I'm going to hunker in on the messianic prophecies, the miracles. I'm going to talk about all that Jesus Christ did. I'm going to spend my time there. I'm not going to talk about the universe. I'm not going to talk about the Bible. I'm not going to talk about truth because he's already affirmed all those things. I'm going to focus in on his shoulder, on his Jesus Christ. That's where his problem was. Patrick, this was the last student we talked to. He said, actually, I'm convinced that Jesus is God. I just don't care. I mean, how could he let bad things happen to good people? So this one's pretty easy. What was his problem with? Problem of evil and suffering. He's like, man, if there's a God out there, I believe in him, but I just don't like him. And so you know what? I'm going to spend all my time with him. I'm not going to talk about the design of the universe. I'm not going to talk about the Bible. I'm not going to talk about prophecies. I'm going to talk about how I think a good God allows things in our life to help us understand how great of a situation we're in. I like to tell people this. I think God lets fires roam here on earth to remind us that there's a greater fire to come. Imagine if there was no such thing as pain and suffering and somebody came up to you and said, Jesus will save you from the pits of hell. You go, can't be that bad. I've never experienced any hell. I think God gives us a little bit of hell right now. So he says, by the way, there's a big hell coming and this is going to forewarn you. And there's much more to unpack there, but I think that gives us an idea.